the novel I wrote published in 1988, Quinn's book. That was an unfinished story, and I always felt that Quinn was going to go someplace exotic, the story ended in 1864 at the Saratoga, opening of the Saratoga racetrack. And I know that Quinn himself, who was a journalist, had covered the Civil War. I knew he was going to do something weird, and he did quite a few weird things. He went out to cover Custer and West, and he went to Canada with the invasion by the Fenians when they were going to take over Canada in order to conquer Ireland and take it away from England. One of the most courageous and harebrained invasions in history, and I never got to write about that. And then in the course of all this, I discovered that Quinn went to Cuba and wrote a book about it. And that was an impulse to bring young Danny Quinn, whom I had figured out would be the way to tell the story, would be through Quinn. And then I reached back, and there was his grandfather inspiring him to go to Cuba or someplace. And when he was in Miami working, as I had been, the Cuban Revolution was an alluring attraction on the horizon. So Quinn goes down, and then it was a matter of just constant fusing of all those three different worlds to make them cohere and interact. And I found all kinds of connections to Albany. The Albany mayor in 1927, William S. Hackett, he was thrown out of an open car in an accident in Havana and had a head injury and developed erysipelas, which is now very curable. But he died after lingering for 2 or 3 weeks in Havana, and the Havana-Albany connection was very intense. I also found out Fulgencio Batista's children, 2 of his daughters, I think, went to the Kenwood Academy, a convent of the Sacred Heart here in Albany, somewhere in the 40s or 50s. And so I began to think of using that, and that kind of connection. When I began reading about Cuban life and how much of it was interacted in New York City, and how many educated Cubans came to this country to go to college or to learn their business trades or whatever, or to spend their money up in Saratoga, and it was a constant connection. And then after Prohibition, which was where I sort of came into the picture with Cuba for the first time, Cuba was a major player in Prohibition because it was producing rum, and it was very close to this country, and so the rum came up sometimes in Coast Guard cutters to New York and was dropped off in the bay and picked up by smugglers and bootleggers and sold to the very thirsty American public. And also, I remember right after when all the saloons in Albany closed, 1919, the end of 1919, the beginning of 1920, so many Albany bartenders went down and got jobs in Havana, and it was an open city, and it had a great allure always in its beauty and in its music and its dancing, and then in those years it became like a prototype for what was really going on underground here in the speakeasy culture and the nightclub culture and the jazz age and the advent of music and They gave us, Cuba gave us the rumba and so many more dances that have taken over our imagination. It was more and more Cuba had occupied my mind, and I'm sure it had occupied the American public.